Hello, reader friends, and welcome to the Book Dragon channel. Today I have Keshe Chow, an author of a book that just released called The Girl with No Reflection, and it is young adult, and I will let Keshe take over and talk about herself and her new book.
Thank you so much for having me, Alexis. So I'm an author. I'm obviously from Australia, as you can tell by my broad Aussie accent, but I was born in Malaysia, so I'm actually Chinese, Malaysian, Australian in heritage. I wrote The Girl with No Reflection, my YA fantasy novel, and it's just released actually like last week. And in summary, it's a dark YA fantasy with lots of romance elements, and that's inspired by Chinese mythology. It basically involves a princess that gets pulled into a mirror world, and in the mirror world, she discovers that the reflections aren't actually reflections, but sentient creatures that have been cursed to mimic us. And so over time, the curse has started to wear off, and the reflections are getting a bit restless, and they're making plans to burst out from the mirrors and attack us and replace us. And so my main character is tasked with closing the barrier, basically, between our world and the mirror world.
Oh, that's awesome. So tell me a little bit about you and your writing life.
So, I mean, I when I wrote this book, actually, I had my kids were still quite young. I've got a 5 and a 9-year-old, as we were discussing before the recording started. And back then, obviously, it was a few years ago, so they were like a baby and a toddler. And so I was basically doing all my writing at night. So I had like zero
Gosh.
routine. I was just like, getting writing in after they went to sleep. And, my toddler would often be sort of like co-sleeping with me. So I'd be like sort of like
Oh my
propping the
goodness.
laptop like on top of him as he slept on my lap and doing it that way. Sometimes I'd have him like in a carrier and I'd write at like a standing desk as well during the day. So it was just kind of like grabbing time whenever I could. So, it was challenging. And now they're a little bit older, so they're in school, and so I've got sort of like the day times to write, which is really nice. So yeah, my writing routine is basically drop the kids off at school, and then sometimes I'll go to the shops or like go to the gym or something like that, and then I'll come back and write and do sort of like social media stuff, and then school pickup comes around very, very quickly. So so I'm always finding that I'm like rushing to get my stuff done, and then rushing out the door to get them again. So yeah, that's basically it. And I don't do so much at night anymore.
Yeah. I'm just blown away that you could even do it while having young children, even at night, because that is such that is such a task.
It
So
is.
that's really impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I don't actually know like how I did it now anymore. I think like I was just kind of relatively new to writing. So I was just running on adrenaline, and I was like so
Mhm.
excited about doing it that I just like wanted to do it all the time. And now it's kind of
Mhm.
like, I still enjoy writing, but it's not as like as much of a new thing. So now I'm kind of like, I like the fact that I can kind of like schedule it during regular
Yeah.
hours, and then at nighttime I'll usually sort of like read and stuff like that, rather than and do like social media stuff, rather than sort of like actually things that tax my brain so much. So
So, whenever you were writing, you're on adrenaline, were you just like pouring out the words and revising later, or did you have kind of a rough outline, or was it like a mix of both? What did that look like?
so I'm really kind of a pantser in general. So I kind of like just write without having an outline. And so I did that with this book. But usually once I get about halfway through, I will start to sort of like jot down kind of plot points for the rest of the book. But the book did get heavily revised. Like the book that I queried with back in 2021 when I first signed with my agent, was a completely different book to what it is now, after going through sort of like agent edits and then many, many rounds of publisher edits and things like that. So yeah, it's changed quite a bit since then, but yeah, hopefully it's a bit stronger. So
Yeah, yeah. And I think that it's pretty normal for
yep,
revisions and all of that. So,
it is. Yeah,
uh
yeah.
tell me about some of the major themes in your book.
So yeah, as I said earlier, it's inspired by Chinese mythology. So it's not strictly historical fiction, because I didn't want to have to stick too rigorously to any sort of like one era or anything like that. But it is inspired by Imperial China. So there's sort of like a lot of historical elements in it that are sort of taken from all parts of Chinese history and kind of mishmashed into something, as well as sort of like some, modern aspects as well, because I wanted it to be very relatable. But essentially, yeah, there's a lot of sort of like Chinese myths and some that are a little bit more obscure. Like the big one that I based the book on was the moon goddess and archer myth, which is very obviously very well known. But there's also other myths about like harp and phoenix and a little bit of like Taoist stuff. And so I kind of wove a lot of sort of Chinese elements through the text as well, because I just wanted it to have that sort of like fairy tale mythology, folklore sort of feeling
Mhm.
to it. That's really kind of, a bit dark but a bit whimsical. And I think one of the big, and we were sort of talking a bit about this earlier in our conversation before the recording started. There are also sort of like quite a lot of feminist themes in this book, because one thing that I found when I was researching Chinese history, and we talked about lost women, is that
Yeah.
Chinese history for the large part was very, very patriarchal, and a lot of the women that are named in Chinese history, they aren't actually named by their names. They're only sort of known by like monikers that were
Mm.
dubbed to them, or like their relationship to the important
Mhm.
men that were in their lives. And Chinese naming convention is like really complex. So important powerful men, so like emperors and things, ended up with like a whole long list of different names that were like they're like names that were given to them after their deaths, and their names in life, and the names that they were given like when they ascended royalty. And they had like so many different names for different situations, and then the women were just like the concubine, or the consort, or like
Yeah.
they didn't have
Right.
like as much emphasis. So I felt like there was a lot of emphasis on the men in Chinese history. So I really sort of like wanted to write this book where the women were the central sort of the central element. It was really centering them in the narrative. They had agency. They made decisions for good or for ill. Like they didn't always make the right decisions, but it
Right.
wasn't that they were only guided by the men that were sort of making decisions for them. So yeah, I kind of like, that's not strictly historical. Like obviously there were important and powerful women in history, but most of the time they had to subvert societal expectations,
Mhm.
and they had to go against the social mores and stuff like that, and they had to really claw themselves to that position of power. Whereas in this reimagined history, I wanted to make it that women were sort of did have more power and more agency in their lives.
I love
But
that.
there was,
So
but
go
there's still elements of patriarchy there.
Yeah. I love that. So describe your main character a little bit more.
Yeah, so she's 18, and so she's definitely like a teenager. She's grown up being very sheltered. So she came from like a small kind of smaller province, and is basically moved across the empire to marry into the imperial royal family. And but when she was growing up, she had like she only had older brothers. She was the youngest. She was the only daughter. Her parents were not very conventional in that, like they didn't, only value like their sons. They really like cherished their daughter, and they indulged her, and she was a little bit spoiled, and she was really like babied. And they did have expectations on her, because I think that's inevitable. I think when
Yeah.
you're growing up, especially as part of an Asian family, I think there's always like expectations for you to be a certain sort of type of woman when you grow up, but they still were pretty indulgent about her. So when she sort of first moves to this new province, and shows up at the imperial palace, she's sort of not prepared for like how much of a fish out of water she will become. She's used to being sort of like the princess, and being sort of like a big fish in a small pond, and now she's sort of like this newcomer that doesn't really know the new sort of order of things. And she's sort of quite restricted, even more so than she was at home. So she's restricted, and so she sort of lashes out, and some of that sort of impulsiveness and this headstrongness and stubbornness that she kind of cultivated growing up, because she's always been given so much leeway, comes out kind of in probably the worst possible ways. But again, it's about sort of the fact that she she's like the author of her own narrative, and so all the decisions she makes, she has to deal with the consequences of. But at least she gets to sort of make those decisions, and it's not sort of just that she's like being wafted around in different
Yeah.
ways, and being driven by sort of what's happening around her.
So do you consider yourself like her? Or are there aspects of
uh
her that are like yourself?
there are definitely aspects of her that are like myself. I think that my family would probably consider me very stubborn and very headstrong. very determined. And I definitely didn't make good decisions as a teenager. I definitely did
Yeah.
not. I probably made very terrible decisions that now I look back and I'm just like, oh gosh, I just cringe. But
I think we all
no,
do, yeah.
yeah, no, I think if any of us look back at our teenage years and don't have any regrets, then we've probably done it wrong.
Probably,
but
yeah.
but yeah, so I do think that there are definitely elements of myself. I think in general, all of my characters are probably more brave and courageous than I would be in those situations. I feel like in some of the, sometimes I'll read a book and like there'll be, I don't know, like a zombie apocalypse or something like that. And like instead of like fighting back, I'd probably be the one like curled up in the corner or hiding
Right?
under the bed or
Yeah.
something, wedging myself in the wardrobe. Yeah, so that aspect of things, I think, she's different from me. But yeah, I think there's definitely elements of her that mirror my own personality.
Maybe if we had a zombie apocalypse, she would come out in you, like, you wrote her, so she would be
Maybe,
there, and
yes,
maybe you could
yes,
fight
yes.
back.
Yeah, it's funny because on my in my day job, I'm a vet, and there's that meme going around that like in a zombie apocalypse, you like want a vet to be like
Yes.
on your team because like
Yeah.
of all the skills that we have. And every time I read that, I'm like, yeah, I do have that skills, but then I'm like, but I still would probably be like shit scared and probably be running away. Like I mean, like I do have those skills like in a controlled environment when like the animal is like
Mhm.
adequately restrained under anesthetic if they're like aggressive or whatever. But yeah, no, it's maybe you're right. Maybe it would come out with the adrenaline. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
deep inside you. So, what other young adult books, or what are some companion, like, comp titles, like, some that are very similar to this one?
Okay, so yeah, so comp titles, I would say that some of like the Asian fantasy, especially the ones that like have a bit of a more fairy tale feel. So things like Elizabeth Lim's, the duology, Six Crimson Cranes. I absolutely like loved that book.
Mhm.
Um, and even though it's adult, I would say that Su Lin Tan's like Daughter of the Moon Goddess probably has some similar
Yeah.
elements where you've got mythology being woven through the text, but it's kind of moved beyond the original story. It's not like a straight retelling. It's kind of woven
Mhm.
into like a greater narrative. So that's probably another one. And I think a lot of people have said that I haven't read Scarlet Alchemist yet, but I do want to. I've got it on my shelf
Oh, okay.
by Kylie Lee Baker. That's also, they say that it's a good comp. So some of my readers have said it's that. And Judy Eileen, I think that's a good comparable as well. Yeah, so sort of fans of those sort of books, I think, would be fans of this book too, potentially,
Yeah.
hopefully.
So, what, when you got the cover of your book, so I really like how, I love both of your book covers, the UK
Me too.
and the US.
Yes.
Um, how did you feel whenever you saw those, like, appear? Like, because I know that you don't probably get a whole lot to say about the design process, so how did you feel whenever you saw them?
I was absolutely over the moon. And the thing is that like I used to think that I was kind of like an artistic person. I did sculpture and
Mhm.
ceramics when I was like in school and stuff like that, and I drew a lot. But then artists and illustrators and designers are like just next level. Like they can picture things that I just can't. Like, when I used to draw, I used to like kind of draw very realistic and I would like copy things and I don't think I have that sort of like brain that can like visualize something completely new and like bring it to life. Whereas like artists can. And so at first I didn't really know at all like the direction that they were going to take. And
Mhm.
when the initial sketch for the US cover first dropped in my inbox, it was obviously like black and white. And so I was just like a bit like, oh, because I couldn't picture what it would look
Mhm.
like with all the
Yeah.
details. And it was just like a very simple black and white sketch. And then my editor and the cover designer, Casey Moses, who is from Delacorte, they were the ones who kind of went through and gave all the feedback. And then it sort of came into my inbox kind of looking like this, which, going from the black and white version, which I actually have on my social media. So like I think I put it on my Instagram where like I sort of like did a little comparison before and after, like
Yeah.
of the black and white sketch to this. Like it's completely different. Like
Oh,
it just
yeah.
came to life. It was amazing. And so yeah, that cover, when it came looking like this into my inbox, I was just like, oh my goodness, like I just couldn't
The
imagine
it
like anything else.
yeah, so the top one is the US one, right?
The top one is a US one, the green one.
Yeah.
And I think like green is also like quite an unusual color for a cover. So I was kind of like, and
Yeah.
actually the funny thing is when I first saw it, because I'm in Australia, all of my emails come in overnight. So I was on my phone. So I came into my inbox and I opened it up on my phone. And I also have my phone on night mode at night, like, you know, with that kind of like,
Right.
orangey cast so that it
So
doesn't have the
yeah.
blue light that affects your melatonin. So I opened it up and I did not I didn't see it was green because it had cancelled out some of the green. So I was just like, oh, it's a beautiful cover and I love all the details and things like that. And I closed it down. And then the next morning, one of my friends who I'd sent it to, my writer friends, was like, oh, it's very green. And I was like, what do you mean? It's not green.
I
And so then I
love
had to
that.
open it up on my computer and I was like, oh my God, it is green. I got like a total
Yeah.
jump scare. But I think green is really good because it kind of, it stands out. It's a bit different from the other ones. And I just
I
love all the
agree.
creepy elements as well. I love
Mhm.
the reflection kind of like busting out of the mirror. That was, that's definitely, it's got those vibes. So that was good. And then, yeah, with my UK cover. So initially when I got my deal with the UK publisher, which is Hot Escape, they were going to use the same cover to begin with, which, they were like, it's so gorgeous, we're just going to use the same one because we love it so much. And I was like, oh, that's great. It is a gorgeous cover. And I guess it's probably good for like brand recognition. But at the same time, I was a little
Mhm.
bit like, oh, I kind of would like to see what someone else comes up with because,
Yeah.
I think the more art, the better. And then, yeah, I don't know why they changed their mind, but a few weeks later, my editor in the UK emailed me and they were like, oh, actually, we've changed our mind. We're going to get Michaela Alcano to do your UK cover. And I looked up Michaela's work and I had already been familiar with it because I'd seen a lot of her covers, but I just didn't know that, who the designer was. And she was like, had done some of my favorite covers ever. So I was so excited. And then she ended up sending through about like 4 or 5 cover concepts that were sketches again. And again, they were like, which is your favorite? And
Mhm.
I'm like, I'm finding it really hard to imagine like what they would look like fully
Mhm.
covered. Like they are just black and white sketches to me at the moment. But I ended up picking one, and then that was the same as what my editor liked the best. So we sent it back, and then again, it just sort of landed in my inbox looking like this. And I was like, to go from like the black and white version to this is just like, that's like genius. It's magic. I just don't know how they do that. But yeah, I absolutely adore that cover. Again, it's got like some creepy elements. If you look at the reflection in the water a little
Yes.
bit more
Yeah.
closely, you see like the eyes are a little bit scary. And yeah, I adore both covers. And people are always like, which do you like best? And I'm like, I can't choose. I feel like they both capture the vibe so well, but they're so different, so distinct. But like, I
Mhm.
just love them both. Yeah, I got very, very lucky with the cover process. And yeah, I count my blessings every day.
Yeah, this is gonna be one that people want both versions. So they'll they
Oh,
wanna
I hope
get
so.
both
Yeah.
copies. Yeah, because
Yeah,
it's
yeah. It is
they're
gorgeous.
both
And
different,
yeah,
but yeah.
and the US cover has actually
Mhm.
got gold foiling on the hardback. So if you lift
Oh.
up the dust jacket, there's like a stamp of like a phoenix, which is like a little bit of an Easter egg from the book. And
Oh my
yeah, the
gosh.
UK cover has silver foiling on the actual dust jacket itself, where the moon is and all the water lines and stuff like that, which
Mhm.
is really stunning in real life. So yeah, when I sort of have been like signing copies, like for my family and friends, I have to have like both a silver and a gold Sharpie.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
the young adult fantasy coming out in just over a year. So it's scheduled at the moment for fall 2025. I don't know the month yet. And that's also with Delacorte Press in the US. And it's basically, it's called For No Mortal Creature. And it's based on like a kind of traditional, very old, ancient Chinese idea that ghosts can die and become ghosts of ghosts. And so I sort of took that idea and I sort of ran with it, and I made it so that like ghosts could die, become ghosts of ghosts, and then ghosts of ghosts could die again and become ghosts of ghosts of ghosts. And it's kind of like, how deep does the
That's
afterlife go? So I've always sort of thought of it as being like my inception with Ghosts book, because it's like, how deep does the afterlife go?
yeah.
Um, and also, we were talking, you mentioned Bronte earlier, and I'm a massive
Mhm.
Bronte fan. So I also sort of had it as inspired by Wuthering Heights. So I sort of took that really like sort of gothic feel and that sort of, like simmering feminine rage, I suppose, and maybe a little bit like the dark kind of the darkness of humanity, and wove that through as well. So it's kind of like Wuthering Heights times Inception with ghosts. It's a bit of a weird one. But yeah, so basically in it, the main character has to sort of delve through the layers of the afterlife, go deeper and deeper, trying to sort of save, I guess, or help her grandmother who died, and take revenge on the boy who once betrayed her, who is also a ghost.
That is so funny that before we hit record, I was talking about a book I just finished, The Lost Bookshop, and I said,
Yes.
people who love Wuthering Heights are going to love this. And then here we are, Wuthering Heights.
I love Wuthering Heights. Like, it is just such an
Destiny.
amazing examination of like humanity, I think. And I
Yes.
just love the darkness in it, and just
Mhm.
how it is not like it's not like a happy story, but it's so impactful. Like, it just really, yeah, I've read it many times, and yeah, just love that book. And it's just like it's not like a love story, it's just very twisted, which appeals to me.
It's hard to describe it, and it's
It
kind
is
of,
hard.
yeah, it's all vibes, I feel like. It's just that
Yeah, there's a lot
short,
of vibes.
just feelings, all of the feelings. So, well,
Yeah,
I'm
for
really
sure.
excited. So,
Oh,
congratulations on another book. That is awesome.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm actually editing it at the moment, so I'm very deep in the editing process. And this has been like probably my hardest book to write, because it is so complex with all the sort of layers, and it's also dual timeline, so it goes back in time in some of the chapters. And so, yeah, it's sort of been one of those, like, some books just pour out of you, and you can sort of like just pour out in like a few months. And other books, this one I think took about a year and a half to like write to completion. I was actually writing this when I was sort of starting to write it when I was on submission with my first book, and then yeah, just sort of like tinkering away at it, and chipping away, and I've like rewritten so many parts of it, and it's been one of those things that it's been like carving my heart out with a spoon, basically. But hopefully
Okay.
it'll be okay in the end, and work well, and hopefully you can
Yeah.
probably sense some of that like despair.
Yes, the emotion.
Yeah.
Make us connect to it more.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So, we're almost done with our talk, and I appreciate you coming, but let's end with book recommendation or what you're reading right now.
Okay, so I am reading, and I've had to slow down my reading a lot because of, like, book launch week, and then also sort of like editing and stuff like that. So it's hard sometimes to sort of do both. So reading is often in my downtime. But currently I'm reading an arc of Mistress of Bones by Maria Z. Medina, who is a 2025 debut, and it's amazing so far. I haven't finished it, but it's really good. And I'm also reading One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig, although I've been, again, chipping away at it very slowly because I'm sort of
Mhm.
managing different things. Um, and I just finished Rebecca Ross's Divine Rivals duology. So I listened to Ruthless Vows, and I think the actual audio book narrators were so amazing. They were,
Oh,
they did an
really?
amazing, they were perfect. Um, and sorry, Siri is just opened up for some reason. Okay, just close Siri down. Bye bye, Siri. Um, it was like, yeah, I could see all of
Yeah.
my words coming up on the side of the screen, and the voice text.
Yeah.
um, and in general recommendations, we were talking about zombie apocalypse books before, and I read one last year by Robin. I don't know if I'm going to get her name right. Wasley, called "Dead Things Are Closer Than They Appear," and it's a young adult urban fantasy. Yeah, it's so good. It's
Yes.
beautiful. I love that one.
Yes.
It's just so much fun, and it's got a cat character, which is totally my jam. So, so I would
Yeah.
recommend that. Interested in zombie apocalypse stories, because we were talking about it, so it's a bit of a
That
theme.
one is one I recently read and just could not contain myself. And yes, I
Yeah.
love the cat. Um,
Yes.
I want to call it a familiar, but it's not a familiar. But yeah, the cat buddy, and then just, yeah, all of the magic in there. And I have started One Dark Window.
Yes.
But then I put it to the side for something else, and now I'm like waiting for that perfect moment. I think I'm like building this book up in my head.
It's got a lot
Like,
of
I
hype.
know
Yeah, for sure.
it's
Yeah.
gonna be good. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
So,
I think it's probably like the perfect fall book for you guys, like, as you head
yeah.
into the cold weather and the spooky season, because it
Mhm.
again has that sort of like really gothic feel to it. And yeah, it's really good. A lot of vibes as well. I think I'm a big fan of books with vibes.
Yes, I think I am too. I'm not really, as long as it makes me, I don't know, as long as I'm loving what's happening, we're good.
Yeah,
Doesn't matter
yeah.
what's happening. So and I would recommend The Lost Bookshop. I don't remember the author right now, but that just recently finished and just devoured it. And if you like literary works
I
and
love literary
women,
books.
and
Yes.
that would be a great, and it has a dual timeline, which is really cool. And
Ah,
it's a magic
amazing.
bookshop.
Yeah, that sounds so good.
So
Sounds so good. I
that's,
love
and then
books
a
about books.
recent another recent YA that, well, so I'm reading right now, The Ones Who Come Hungry.
Oh, okay.
Is
I've
it
not heard
called?
of that one.
I have the um, it's more horror. The Come Back Hungry.
Oh,
This
wow, that
one's
cover is
pretty,
amazing.
it might not come out till August actually. No, July
Oh,
2nd.
okay. Oh,
But it
cool.
just came out. So, but this one's kind of, I'm about a quarter of the way through, and it's pretty good. And then one I recently read that I loved was The Poisons We Drink.
Oh, yes, yes, I
Um,
read that one. I think it was like last year I read it as an arc, and
yes,
was it last year or this year? This year. Oh my goodness.
it came out in March. You could
It
have
did,
read it
yes.
last year.
No, I did read it this year. I'm just trying to I've messed up the timelines in my head. I'm not very
Yeah,
good at
but no,
remembering timelines. But yeah, I love that one too. It was really good.
that one had
Really
another
good.
cat. So
Yeah,
that's where
yeah,
the
it did.
cat familiar, that's what I was, yes,
Yes, yes, that's a cat
that's the
familiar.
cat
Yeah,
familiar.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, the witches and the cats familiars. Yeah.
So much
Um,
fun.
yeah, it was a lot of
Okay.
fun. I love that one too.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And I hope that you have a great month-long celebration of your book coming out, and that it just keeps getting traction and
Thank you so
wonderful
much.
things for you.
That's really kind. Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful to talk. I always love talking books with people.
Same. I could go all day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All
All right.
right.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. Have